This is S.J. Thomason with Truth Matters at Christian-apologist.com. This is Tom Holland on the right and Justin Brierley on the left. And Tom has a pretty amazing experience that happened to him that has brought him a little closer to Christianity. Let's hear.
But there was a church, and we went to this church. It had been built by Armenian refugees from the genocide in the Ottoman Empire. And then they'd come here, and then fresh genocidal enemies had turned up. So they had a very bad run. And in this church, the Islamic State fighters had demolished the altar with power drills, and they had toppled over the font, and they had pulled down all the icons and smashed them and jumped up and down on them. And I saw, amid all the kind of the rubble and the broken glass, there was this kind of piece of paper, of card that had been left. And I picked it up, and it was a picture of the Annunciation. So the great wings of Gabriel sweeping backwards as he knelt before the Virgin. And I felt that I felt it was a kind of one of those thin places that people talk about, where the dimension of the heavenly suddenly seems incredibly close. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk in this vein in a congregationalist church, but it's going to get worse. But it felt incredibly vivid, and I kept that image. And I was in a place where people had been crucified, and a sense of what that meant to be, 2 miles away, to have people who had thought, as the Romans had thought, that execution and crucifixion were ways of upholding their power, that's the power, that's the signification the cross had for these people, not as a symbol of the power of the weak over the strong, but the opposite, power of the strong over the weak. And it was, it was kind of existentialist abyss opened up before me. And so I think I was, for that reason, very open to the sense of angels' wings brushing overhead in this desecrated church. I mean, I was dehydrated. I was in a mess. I can come up with all kinds of Dawkins-esque reasons why I felt like this, but it was a very vivid, real feeling to me, and I kind of cherish it. And then, and I kind of put this image away, and kind of, it was a kind of souvenir of my trip, but not really much more. And I did think, well, it was all just dehydration and exhaustion. And then I, as part of my church tourism, I went to St. Bartholomew the Great, which is a part of a priory that was built 901 years ago this year. The hospital was also a part of it, which still exists. So it's very old, medieval. So I went there. And this is supposedly the only place that the Virgin appeared in London, recorded appearance of the Virgin. And she turned up in the 12th century to tell off the monks who'd got the liturgy wrong. There was kind of very bossy appearance. But I like that. And it was also the place where Benjamin Franklin, so in the Lady Chapel, when the Lady Chapel got built in the wake of this manifestation and then got sold off with the Reformation, and it became a radical printer's office, and Benjamin Franklin worked there. So this church is the only place where both the Virgin and Benjamin Franklin had appeared. And it seemed to me the embodiment of everything that I was writing about in Dominion. So I found the services there very, very powerful and moving, and they're very high church. So they're kind of the opposite of this, I guess. But I found them very, very moving, very sublime. And so I went to that. And then in the COVID outbreak, the last one, the Omicron spike, which I think was just before Christmas, was it 21? I can't remember. Yes, I think it was Christmas 21. I had a bowel cancer diagnosis right in the midst of the Omicron spike. So the hospital was absolutely being overwhelmed. And I went in and I had the endoscopy, and the surgeon said, well, it doesn't look good. I mean, it might have spread. It might have gone into your lymph nodes. So we're going to send you off for scans. But I think basically looking at it, I think that we're going to have to cut out a huge chunk of your bowel, give you a colostomy bag, and then stitch it back together again in 6 weeks. And that should get rid of the cancer, unless it's spread to the lymph nodes. But we'll find out about that. We'll let you know before Christmas Eve. And Christmas Eve came, and there was no, they didn't tell me. And I in no way blame them, because I knew that they were overwhelmed. I mean, it was the worst kind of time to be having this kind of treatment. And so, but I felt kind of, oh, Lordy. So I went to midnight mass at Bart's that Christmas Eve. And at the end of the service, I looked over to where the Virgin had appeared. And I thought, well, I might as well give it a go. You know, there's no atheist in a foxhole. What have I got to lose? So I went, and I haven't prayed. I mean, you know, when I was young, and I thought I've got to pray for everyone, or they'll die. And I remember that kind of nervousness as a 7-year-old, thinking, who have I left off? Oh, I don't want them to die. And I hadn't really prayed since then. But I went to this place where the Virgin had appeared, and I gave a heartfelt prayer. You know, come on, please. And all kinds of things went right from that point on. And I won't go into the details, but basically, it seemed miraculous that in the most unexpected way, I not only got access to the photos, which told me that I didn't have cancer in the lymph nodes, but also I found out that I didn't have cancer, the cancer hadn't spread from the polyp, and that therefore I didn't need to have this chunk of the gut removed. And 2 years on, I seem clear of it. So I dodged a massive, massive bullet there. And again, the perfectly rational reasons how this happened, but it was so unexpected, and I don't want to go into the details of it, but they required so many coincidences that I have been tempted to see it as miraculous. And I told this story to a well-known Australian singer who I think may even be in this audience here, I'm not sure, and said, you know, obviously it is a coincidence, but I feel ungrateful to the Virgin for saying that. And he said, well, yeah, I think you are being ungrateful. And I felt school and started to think, well, you know, have I had a Marian visitation? And then I started thinking about that piece of, you know, that image of the Annunciation, and thinking, was I wrong when I focused on the angel? Was I actually should I have actually focused on the Virgin? Was she there? And as a Protestant agnostic, the idea that I had had a Marian intervention seemed to me so sublimely funny. I thought, well, I mean, if it's true, God has the most wonderful sense of humor. And I kind of like the idea of a God with that kind of sense of humor. And I hug to myself the thought that I've been touched by something that utterly transcends every prejudice that I would have against the possibility of it happening. You know, not just.
Isn't that just wonderful? Well, we have more, so stay tuned. Here we have Jordan Peterson and Tammy Peterson, and this is on the Gabby After Hours channel. Let's listen.
She had a very rare cancer, which was 100% fatal, and which generally conferred upon its bearer a lifespan of approximately 10 months. People can imagine what that would be like.
My mother's family, they all died fairly young from cancer and different kinds of things. When I was sitting in the office with my husband, we were shocked, but I also thought back to my family and how everyone had passed away early and there was cancer. And I thought, okay, you know, maybe, you know, this is my destiny genetically. And so I went home to tell my son. I didn't expect the response that I got, and I saw terrible grief in his eyes. And somehow that grief reflected back to me his love for me, and I realized that I did not have that same feeling of worthiness for myself. And I thought, whatever time I have left, I want to devote myself to loving my family and my friends and accepting whatever help comes my way.
Well, Tammy's always been a stoic sort of person. She's not one to make mountains out of molehills. She handled the news of her illness and then the surgery and the aftermath of the surgery with her customary grace.
They had taken out all the lymph. There was one place where it didn't heal properly, and my body filled up with fluid. I had lost 30 pounds. They put me in the hospital, and Queenie Yu came to visit.
So when I found out that Tammy was sick, I emailed her and mentioned that I wanted to visit her if she was in town. And she mentioned that she was at the Toronto General Hospital. I prepared a gift package for her.
She came with a blessed rosary that the Pope had blessed and a small picture of Mother Mary holding Jesus. And it was an Asian representation of the Virgin Mary.
When Tammy saw the rosary, she said, "Well, this is a rosary." And I was surprised. And I said, "You know what it is?" And she said, "Yes, but I don't know how to use it."
When you learn to pray the rosary, which I had never done, she would say the first part and I would say the last part of each prayer. And she would tell me the story of each mystery and then ask what intention I wanted, if I wanted to pray for anyone. And so we would pray and I would tell her my life story and I would cry. But it really soothed me. And I would go back to my room and my husband would usually there be sleeping in my bed waiting for me to come back. I'd wake him up and get back into bed and then we'd play cards for the rest of the day. And this happened every day for 5 weeks. So she came every day.
Tammy spent time with her praying. And then you might say, well, what was she doing when she was praying? And I would say she was doing what Job does in the book of Job, which was attempting to reconcile herself to the torments that were being visited upon her through no apparent fault of her own. And one of the conclusions that Job comes to as a consequence of his trials was that when the hell of suffering, unjust suffering, opens up around you, you can make it much worse by also being bitter and resentful and ungrateful and shaking your hands at fate and God, perhaps at yourself too. And so Tammy didn't do that. She certainly faced her impending fate with grace and attempted to do that consciously. And the prayer was an aid in that endeavor.
I think when you're chronically ill, just the littlest thing can really be excruciating. And so the prayers helped me get through excruciating scans. I wouldn't really even notice the pain that I was in as long as I prayed without fail, like just constantly prayed. I never allowed myself to worry. I just gave myself to God and to the prayer to take me where I needed to go, where he needed me to go, whatever he needed me to go through. I decided that it wasn't up to me anymore. And I think I had led my life like that way for a very, very long time. And this trial, this challenge was given to me to come to this realization. And I did. Thank the Lord, right?
And Tammy is now cancer-free. And she also came back to the Catholic Church. She came to the Catholic Church. She went through RCIA, and a very powerful testimony from Tammy Peterson. So I encourage you to go over to that channel and listen to the rest of it. So if you like this kind of content, please like, subscribe, and do come again and share this video with your friends. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.